Welcome to The Dependents, a podcast of conversations about how our dependence on forces outside of ourselves can help or hinder our growth in our lives. My name is Jamie Adams, and I hope you enjoy your time here. Welcome back to The Dependents. This is the first intro that I'm recording to a conversation that I'm having with a guest this week. The reason I'm doing that is because there is no video for this recording. There is no video because this is the first podcast episode that I've recorded 100% in my home studio, and we don't have cameras set up to do that at the moment, although I am working on that. I'm talking this week with my former neighbor, my good friend, Judge Eric Moyé. I met Judge Moyé, or Eric, the first day that I moved into my house in Dallas. He was my neighbor for about 7 years. The day that I moved in, I'd been in Austin all week working, had movers come. My girlfriend at the time, who was incredible, coordinated the entire move. When I showed up back home, everything was moved in for the most part, and I had a big bag of Lockhart's barbecue and a 6-pack of Shiner Bock. I immediately, of course, thought that Melissa had done that. She let me know that, in fact, Eric, our next door neighbor, had brought over the food, brought over dinner as a welcome to the neighborhood gift. And that started a long and ongoing relationship and friendship with Judge Moyé. You probably know Judge Moyé because he was in the news nationally during the pandemic. There was a case early on when businesses were shut down by way of an executive order from Governor Abbott here in Texas. There was a lady who owned a salon. She refused to shut her business down. Her case ended up on Judge Moyé's docket. She again refused inside the courtroom to shut down the business, to apologize, and eventually she ended up sentenced to about a week in prison for contempt. Obviously, that was quite controversial at the time, and we talk a lot about that in this particular podcast. We also talk about Judge Moyé coming to Dallas, Texas from New York in the 70s to go to SMU. We talk about Harvard Law School, how he was the first first African-American attorney hired by a national law firm here in Dallas, Texas back in 1979. And of course, we talk about his family, his faith, and other friendships and relationships. And of course, we talk a little bit about our relationship. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I love Judge Moyé. He's a great guy. He's been a mentor to me, and I appreciate him taking time out of his day to come spend a little over an hour for this conversation. So without further ado, my conversation with Judge Eric Moyé. All right, neighbor, or old neighbor, left me for better pastures, better fields.
For a good-looking woman, yes, but better pastures, better fields, absolutely not. Still my neighbor. Still glad to see you.
That's great seeing you, man. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to get right to the chase. What's the toughest part about being a judge here in Dallas, Texas?
Managing conflict. And that is, at the end of the day, what we do. As you know, I'm a civil court judge, not a criminal judge, so I hear contract disputes, business disputes, personal injury cases, and it's always a zero-sum game. You cannot have a situation where both sides win, unlike if you're doing a business deal where you want to sell a commodity and somebody else wants to buy it, and you want to sell for $1,000 per unit and they want to buy for $500, and you come to the middle at $750 and hope everybody's happy. In the courthouse, one side wins and one side loses. Sometimes both sides end up losing. And managing the conflict among litigants is usually the most challenging part of what we do. Most of the law is very well settled. We have 250 years of common law, so there aren't very many new things that nobody's ever seen before and no appellate court has already ruled on. So just the managing of the interpersonal conflict is probably the biggest challenge.
Is that something you find yourself taking home with you?
I try hard not to. I finish up at the end of the day, and I've got this big roll top desk, And the last thing I do before I leave, pull the top of the desk down, and I try to leave everything there and not take it home with me, and just use the time driving home or wherever I'm going to kind of release myself from what I've done for the day. Fortunately, I've got a great staff that runs the court very well, and I don't take work home very often. In fact, it's been years since I've filled up one of my briefcases with pleadings and files and taken it home to work on the weekend or overnight. I try to leave it at the office every day. What used to happen a lot when I first took the bench is sometimes a former client and sometimes friends would call in the evening and say, "Hey, I've got this legal problem. Can you help me out with this?" And I say, "Well, no, I can't. Of course, I can't give you legal advice, but I know you. Tell me what's going on." And I got to the point where I had to have a hard stop and just say, "I love you. Call me tomorrow at noon. Call me during the work day, because I want to leave work over there, and I want the rest of my waking hours disassociated from work."
Was that something you learned over time, though, or because it sounds like earlier in your career maybe you were a little bit more prone to taking homework?
Oh, absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I took as you recall, I would bring work home fairly regularly, and I had a library in my office where I worked at least 2 or 3 evenings in a week, and usually one day on the weekend. And also back then I had clients, and many clients did not mind calling into the evening to talk about work. And what people, it's still, the law is on one level still a service industry, and if my clients don't think that I'm accessible whenever they need me, they'll find another lawyer. So it really is a part of the job at that point to be accessible after hours. Fortunately, now on the bench, that's no longer an issue.
Yeah. So you've been on the bench now for over 30 years, right?
We're going on 30 years. I had 2 years in the early 90s appointed by Governor Richards. I've been on the bench this time since 2008. So that's 18 years.
Okay, got it. And election season's coming up.
Election season is coming up, yes, indeed, come November.
What's your play? Are you going to stay around?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I won the unopposed. I won the Democratic nomination for my bench. I've got an opponent in the fall. Dallas County is reliably Democratic, and the Democrats have only lost one countywide race since 2006, and that was kind of extraordinary. So I'm feeling pretty good about my chances. I've got a good political team. We've been prodigious in terms of fundraising. So I think 4 more years I'll still be serving. Good Lord willing.
Yeah. Well, as a resident of Dallas County and your former neighbor and friend, you'll get my vote.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Take somebody with you. Don't go vote alone.
So you're from New York.
I am.
You came to SMU for college.
Correct.
How did that happen?
I had an older brother who went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And I remember one Saturday doing the family chores with my parents, going to this store and that store, and they just deciding, let's just go to Baltimore this afternoon. And we got in the car and went barreling down the Jersey Turnpike. And this was in the early 70s, maybe 71, long before cell phones.
Yeah.
And 3 hours later, we're banging on the door of his apartment, and he opened the door, and he was absolutely stunned to see his parents standing at the door. And I thought then, I'm going to go to college so far away, I'm going to have to come and meet him at the airport. There will be no just showing up. And I turned down an opportunity to go to Wesleyan in Connecticut because it was too close to New York. And I'd heard of SMU, of course, and I applied and got a significant scholarship to come to SMU. I knew I wanted to go to law school, and I knew that 7 years of private school education was going to be pretty costly. Had a brother who was doing the same thing, and so they offered a lot of money, and I accepted. And so I just showed up. It's very different back then. My daughter, my stepchildren, we've all done college tours, so they'd been on dozens of campuses before they decide where they're going to go. For me, it was tabula rasa. Got on an airplane, got off the plane in Dallas, took a cab, and here I am at this university. It was. I think it's good to go away to go to college, and I always encourage young people, pick a college somewhere where folks don't know you. I did a talk last week out at Paul Quinn College for some high school kids, and I said, college is like witness protection program, but you don't have to commit a crime first. You know, if you grow up, I was a jock. I didn't want to be thought of as a jock in college, so I went somewhere where nobody knew me, played a little bit of intramural ball first year, but, you know, made myself a little bit more serious. You can't do that if you're going to college with half of your best friends from high school, because the first day you come out doing something a little different, somebody's going to call you on it and say, hey, you know, every time I've seen you, you had, you know, your hat on backwards and a cigarette hanging out your mouth. How are you fronting? What are you trying to do different? College is a place to go and expand, you know, diversify your portfolio, as you business folks would say. It was a great experience. I really loved it.
What was tough about it, though?
Dallas in 1972 was not a very diverse city. SMU had only integrated 6 years earlier when Jerry Levias came in 1966, maybe 68. No, it was 66. And you know, I met an awful lot of people, some benevolent, some not so much so, who had no experience around a diverse group of people. No experience. I met many people. I've never talked to an African American before. One of the real blessings about growing up in New York City, it was impossible to be that siloed. My friends in high school were named Cohen, Palladino, Chu, Gerasimczyk, which, as you well know, is a common Polish name. I understood the high holidays. I understood the difference between what the year of the ram was as opposed to the year of the dog. Growing up in New York at that time, you had an experience of diversity, an experience of different lifestyles, and you could not interact with all of those in a collision. You had to be malleable. You had to be open to different ideas and different ways of doing things, and I think that's just a huge advantage that a lot of folks who might have come from either small towns or Highland Park just didn't see.
Yeah. How did you find yourself dealing with kind of the lack of diversity that existed in Dallas at that time?
Well, I had some close friends on campus. I met and knew and came to know people living in the Dallas community. So among the few folks who went to SMU who were from Dallas, spending time with them, I got very close at that point to my still longtime spiritual leader, Dr. Zan Holmes, who has been my pastor forever, and as he jokes, was looking out for me back in 1974 when he got to the campus. So we coped. We figured out a way, visited other schools, spent some time at what is now called Paul Quinn College, spent some time at North Texas State and in Denton and Texas Women's College.
Got it. And then finished college here,
Mm-hmm.
and then decided to go back the other direction, back up north.
Yep.
went to law school at Harvard.
Correct.
Decent college. People have probably heard of it.
Yeah. So it started off as a small trucking school and just kind of expanded a little bit.
You know, I think I've told you, my best friend has a grad degree from Harvard as well. And I think like your wife, he's an MIT.
Right.
Well, he got his MBA at MIT, got a master's in public administration at Harvard, and then ended up with a doctorate at Stanford.
Pretty impressive.
I'm surrounded. I've found it necessary to surround myself with people with very impressive academic credentials.
Well, water seeks its own level. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, me carrying my 2 years at University of Memphis and my graduate degree from Louisiana Tech.
It's what you do with it.
That's right. Hey, I have no qualms. I had great experiences at both. But why? You mentioned you thought you wanted to go to law school going into college. That was kind of the plan.
Yeah, I've only wanted to do two things in life: be a lawyer and play for the Yankees. And I realized pretty early that playing for the Yankees was not in the cards.
Got it.
But I've always wanted to be a lawyer.
My grandfather played against the Yankees.
I remember we talked about it.
Yeah. So why when you finish here, why go back up north for law school?
Well, Harvard was and is the best law school in the country. And when they decided to admit me, there was never any doubt. Of course, you're gonna give me this opportunity. I'm gonna go ahead and run with it.
Did you apply anywhere else, or?
Oh yeah. Harvard was my reach school. I applied to SMU and was admitted the next day. I applied to maybe 5 or 6 law schools, most of which on the East Coast: University of Chicago, NYU, Cornell. I'm not sure where else. But when Harvard said, "Come on up," everything else went by the wayside.
Got it. So you spent time at Harvard, finished school there.
3 years.
And then just right back to Dallas.
Came back to Dallas, yeah.
And in 1979, you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were the first African-American attorney hired at a major law firm.
That's correct.
In Dallas.
That's correct. At Aiken Gump, Strauss, Howard, and Feld, which was a Dallas-based firm that had, and now it's an international firm, had a D.C. office as well. And they made the offer, and it seemed like a good opportunity at the time.
What was that like? I mean, being the first in a very unique situation in a city that you mentioned not so well versed in diversity at the time.
Well, it was. It presented its own set of challenges, of course. Most pressures, or many pressures, end up being self-induced. And okay, they say nobody into the first. You're hired the first year. There were 5 or 6 of us. They said, of course, nobody ever failed the bar exam. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm the first African American that they hire. Jesus, what's going to happen if I flunk the bar exam? So working harder, more and more pressure on myself. It was interesting to visit with judges going into courts, particularly the state courts, who were not accustomed to seeing African-American lawyers, and certainly not African-American lawyers from the substantial law firms in town. And some were a little bit taken aback. I can recall going to a hearing, not speaking with one of the partners at the firm, going back to the office, then going back to the court to get an order signed. And the judge said, well, this says one thing, it should say something else. So I said, okay. So I pulled out a pen and I made the change and I initialed it. And he looked at me and obviously he thought I was a runner for the law firm. And he asked me, I said, are you an attorney? You're an attorney working for Aiken Gump? I said, yes, sir, I am. And he cursed. He was like, his response was, I'll be doggone. And he just looked at me, and it was obvious in his head. Okay, this is something new to me. It was a time when Dallas still hadn't changed a lot. Now the Dallas judiciary is more than 90% African American women, everybody should change in 40 years. Every place should change in 40 years, and Dallas was no different.
So at the time, did you find yourself in that situation where you had people willing in the firm or otherwise, people close to you willing to kind of put their arms around you and say, "Hey, I know you're gonna experience some bad looks, some racism. Like, I'm here for you. I'll help you get through this."
Yeah, absolutely. I had conversations with prominent members of the firm about being the first. And I had, it was a great place to start practicing law. It was a very progressive firm. Mr. Strauss, one of the named partners, had been the chairman of the Democratic National Committee and was very close to both LBJ and subsequently to Jimmy Carter. There were a lot of folks who were concerned, who remain concerned. Some are still friends of mine to this day, who were just like, okay, when you have some issues, give me a holler. Let's go out and have a beer. Let's talk about what's going on. Why are you doing X, Y, and Z? How do you think someone should respond? And when you get a particular response, how are you going to reply to that response? So, as you well know, and as your listeners know, there's no man is an island. The proverb, "It takes a village." Some people say it's trite. It may be trite, but many trite things are indeed true. I've yet to find somebody in this place of so-called rugged individualism who did not have to rely on somebody, many people, sometimes known and sometimes unknown, to help us along the path.
Yeah, amen to that. Amen to that. So you were an attorney for 14-ish years.
Correct. Close to the governor and the AG, and just was visiting with some of the governor's people, and there was a vacancy on one of the benches here, and I was asked to apply for it. And I had been in those courts a lot, knew my way around, and thought it would be good. Was thinking at that point, it might be nice to be on the other side of the bench, and so I took that position for 2 years, an unexpired term. Was recommended for the federal court by then Senator Lloyd Benson, and then within a couple of weeks of that, he left the Senate and became Secretary of the Treasury under President Clinton. And so that nomination then went by the wayside. And so I started practicing law again, and did that until I decided to run for judge in 2008.
Got it. And why judge instead of practicing law? Ultimately, when you make a decision like that, because I don't know if I told you, I there was a period where I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was candidly driven for two places. Number one, I'm from North Louisiana, pretty rural, actually very rural town. For a long time, kind of wanted to live in that area, like live in Shreveport.
Right.
My perception of being a successful professional was kind of two paths. You're a doctor or you're a lawyer.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I was doing it kind of from a point of view of thought I could make some money, and it was kind of going to enable me a lifestyle to live where I wanted to live. Don't think either of those in my 43 now. There's probably not the best wisdom to make decisions around, but no, I think everybody would probably guess, though, as an attorney, especially a high-profile attorney working for big firms doing corporate litigation, right? There's good financial success that comes with that.
Sure.
And then you transition into public service as a judge or any other type of public position. That's not the driver. So what was the driver for you?
Well, trying cases, the irony is it's really a young person's game. And you don't get really good at it until you've done it for a while and you've had a bunch of experiences, good, bad, and indifferent in the courtroom. But it's incredibly taxing. And I can recall the last case I tried before I took the bench. I'd been elected. I won the Democratic primary. Was feeling pretty good about the general election in 2008 here in Dallas. And I tried a case for a week. And it took me almost 2 weeks to recover, to get back to the point where I could go to bed at about midnight and sleep all night and wake up at 7 the next morning. Because when you're in trial, you may go to bed around 1 or 2. You get home about 9 or 10. You wolf down a burger or a sandwich or something. You work on the next day's stuff. You get in bed. You wake up at 2 in the morning. And you think, what about this idea? And then you wake up again at 4 or 5 in the morning. And I was living at the time in Plano. And I took a hotel downtown because I was deathly afraid of getting on the tollway and being stuck in traffic and missing the beginning of the court day and earning the ire of the jury and also the judge. And so I've been trying cases for a while, almost always successfully. And I thought I'd done that for long enough. I enjoyed my time as a judge. And I tell young people, if you want a profession where you can help people, the law is a good place to be. And you just put that on steroids as a judge. You know, not only sometimes do I see a wrong that fortuitously ends up in my court and I get a chance to write it. Sometimes that's large and consequential, in a very big sense. Sometimes it's just involving just a couple of people. But also, you know, I remember early on in my career seeing a lawyer who was a solo practitioner, and he had a case against a big firm, and they were just, you know, the referee would have thrown the piling on flag 3 or 4 times. Okay, we're going to do this tomorrow morning. We're going to do something else tomorrow afternoon. And then we're going to have to be in the court on Wednesday morning. And then we're going to schedule a deposition for Wednesday afternoon. I'm like, okay, this is really kind of chicken. You know, yeah. So there will be, I just said, there will be one event in this case per week. You want to take a deposition, you take it on Monday. You can't schedule a hearing until the following week. You've got a hearing set next week. You will not have another hearing until the week after that. And just to get this 200-person firm off this guy's butt.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can make an easy call. I'm not going to let this happen. You will not do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it takes a lot more than that. We had a case involving the Texas lemon law. Your listeners will know if there's a car that's got 3 or 4 things wrong, it's got to be identified before it can be sold again as a lemon. And a car manufacturer and seller didn't do that. And we had this case, and it went on for 2 years. And this party, the car company and their lawyers, were just terrible. They would not cooperate in the discovery process. They wouldn't provide documents. Not a single ruling did I make did they obey. They appealed 4 or 5 times. They tried to appeal 4 or 5 times. And I ended up making them bring their national litigation counsel down from the East Coast. And I had read an opinion from a judge in a case involving Facebook, where he sanctioned them $900,000 for discovery abuse. And so I've got this guy on the witness stand, this lawyer, and I just said, let me read you from this other case. This is a classic example of a large, sophisticated client and their law firm taking advantage of the process, doing everything they could to thwart the legitimate ends of the litigation process. And I turned to him, I said, sound kind of familiar to you? And he just kind of sat there very stoically. And I said, well, okay, this is what's going to happen in this case if y'all don't stop messing around. You really do not want to put me to the test. And he did. And I entered a sanction of not quite $900,000, but more than $500,000. And also an order saying that the jury would get an instruction that said the reason that the plaintiff doesn't have the documents to support their position is because they've asked for them and the defendant has refused to give them to them. It's kind of like what we call a spoliation instruction. So if you destroy evidence, the jury's entitled to an instruction that says you destroyed evidence, and if that evidence had come before the jury, it would most likely put you in a very bad light. And at that point, this case, which they said was never going to settled for several $1 million. You get to do right every now and again. And, for people who believe in service, public service, private service, service to one's neighbor, service to one's church, it's a great place to serve. It's a great place to be able to influence things in a direction that we think is positive.
Yeah, you said that so eloquently and well, and you talk about service not just in the public sector or the private sector, but you mentioned to one's neighbor and to one's church. So my first story and encounter with you, which you may or may not remember, but it was almost 9 years ago to the day. I bought this house.
I remember.
You were the neighbor.
I remember.
And I was on a trip. I remember I was in Austin, and my girlfriend at the time, Melissa, was here, and she was conducting the move-in process.
I was so impressed.
I don't think she was very impressed, at least not with me. She wasn't very happy with me that day. But regardless, I got home from my business trip. The movers were here. Melissa was kind of conducting that process. And I showed up back home to a massive bag, brown paper bag of Lockhart's barbecue and a 6-pack of Shiner Bock.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the neighborhood.
And I was like, I told Melissa, this is welcome. Thank you very much. And she's like, well, you're welcome, but it wasn't me. It was the next door neighbor. And so that was my welcome to the neighborhood, was having never met you. You just showed up at my house, noticed that someone new was moving in and brought barbecue and beer.
Well, my days of moving are long over.
They're not long over, man. So, come on now. Like, you just moved 3 years ago now? Yeah, they're not long over. Come on.
I didn't feel like moving carpet or couches or any of that jazz, and so I figured the least I could do is bring a little something to eat. People may not know this and most likely won't, but this is the greatest neighborhood, Kessler Park, where we are now. Because of the folks who live by. And, since we're telling stories about being decent neighbors, when we had that terrible ice storm a couple of years ago, and I was on a plane going to Hawaii and the pipes burst, you went into the house. You got a tool to turn the water off so that water didn't run all over the house. You got towels and soaked up the water. By the way, it was about 12 degrees outside.
It was really
while
cold.
You were doing all of this, and there was no heat on in my house. And took paintings off the wall so that if more water came down from the ceiling, it wouldn't ruin my artwork. I mean, that's so far above and beyond the call. But good neighbors do that kind of thing, and good neighbors make a great place to live.
Amen. Could not agree more with that. But there's one thing. I mean, look, I just in all fairness, I mean, the reason that I was at your house that day is because, as you mentioned, that was a brutal freeze, and I had reached out to you because I needed firewood, because we were without electricity, or there was going to be threat with being out without electricity, and there were kind of these rolling blackouts. So I needed firewood, and I called you, and you said, yeah, of course, just here's my code to my garage, help yourself. And so I went over to get firewood and just unfortunately walked into a situation where your pipes had bursted. So I think that, yeah, I'm just glad that you first lent me the firewood. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know if I'd ever seen the water.
The moral of the story is always do somebody a good deed.
Amen
because
to that.
you never know. It's like a hula hoop. It's going to come right back around.
Yeah,
You never know when that really is the true moral of that story. Doing a good deed comes around and becomes even a greater deed to yourself.
Yeah. But simple acts of kindness of like just picking up barbecue and dropping off barbecue and beer to a new neighbor. Where did that come from in you?
I have tried to look at things in multiple directions. Okay, if I'm going to do something, regardless of what it is, the thought of how would I feel if this was being done to me? As old as the Old Testament, as how you reap, so shall you sow. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And I don't want to sound pious. I don't want to sound holier than thou. But I feel better about myself if I've done some, to use your word, some random act of kindness. And it just seemed like once again, I knew I wasn't going to help you move stuff into this house. So, when I
wasn't even helping myself move anything.
There is that too. When I'm, the times I've moved, I've always thought, okay, aside from having somebody to do all this move for me, what would I like? My first thought is, I'd like a cold beer to sit down and have a bite to eat. And I just thought, at the end of the day, when you move in someplace, you don't want to shower and get dressed and find a restaurant in the neighborhood. You want to just sit somewhere, probably in the midst of 1,000 boxes, and just take a little while to relax. And so it seemed like an easy thing to do. And it really is easy just to go out, not that far out of your way, just to be helpful to somebody else. The world would be a better place if everybody just did that once a day.
Yeah. It's interesting, because that probably, again, not to minimize, it probably took you half hour from start to finish to do, and
not even.
Yeah, a couple of bucks, but the fact that here we are 9 years later and we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it, tens of times since then.
Yeah. And
just those little simple things kind of can be a bridge to building a relationship or building a memory.
Absolutely.
Really, really cool. Something that wasn't so cool, though, about our neighboring was, I think it was 2018. I got a knock on the, well, actually, that's not true. I was on the deck. I was cooking one night on the deck, and you pulled up to the front of the house, and our houses kind of sit at the bottom of a hill. So for those listening, the front of the house, the street is a little bit higher up. I'm on my deck, and I see Eric pull up really, really quickly, faster than he normally drives through the neighborhood. And right behind you are two police officers. And you got out of your car, and they got out of their car, and they looked a little bit alarmed. And I go, Eric, is everything okay? And you looked down kind of through the trees, and you were like, oh, yeah, man, I'll come by in a few minutes. And something had happened that day where I think an attorney had been killed here in town.
Yeah.
And there was some suspicion that the potential killer may have it out for you because of some type of court case. What do you remember about that? Am I pretty right about the?
Yeah, I remember everything about that. The lawyer was a good guy. I couldn't call him a dear friend. He'd been in my court a number of times. He had a cousin who is one of my colleagues, and he was representing this lady against a fellow, and the fellow was representing himself, a pro se litigant. And the case, not surprisingly, wasn't going very well for the pro se litigant. And that is still an open case. His murderer has still not been brought to justice. What did happen was the lawyer left his house one morning, and he was close to 80 years old, between 75 and 80, frail, as one would be at that point. Somebody hit him with a baseball bat, knocked him out, doused him with an accelerant, and set him on fire in his garage.
That's right.
And
at his house, right?
At his house. And within a couple of hours, the police had a report that an individual had written this screed about the legal process and how terrible things were and how he was going to make things right by killing this lawyer and then killing the judge. And so I had just come home, and my bailiff had reached out to some other deputies, and they intercepted me on the way home. And then he called and said, "Go home, stay there. We need until we get this figured out." And I had family that was in town this weekend, and I sent them away. We had, as one of our neighbors said, we had the safest street in Dallas
for months.
For a couple of months, because we had police that, and what was really great about that, some of them, the police that were assigned were also augmented by sheriff's deputies from the courthouse, who just on their own time just said, "Okay, I'm gonna patrol in this neighborhood for a while for this evening." That was probably the nadir of my time on the bench. That was absolutely staggering. I wondered for a long time whether things would have been different had I made some different rulings. This fellow was obviously so frustrated with the opposing lawyer and was so frustrated with the legal system. And think about how lost you've got to be if you have so little faith in one of our institutions that you think the only way that you can get something right is by murdering people. I'm convinced that if this guy had a lawyer, the case would have gone differently, and we wouldn't have lost his soul in the horrific way that we did. I served for a while as a commissioner of the Texas Access to Justice Commission, state commission run by the Supreme Court. I'm convinced that just like if I'm arrested today and I don't have any money, a lawyer will be provided for me. That's in criminal cases. I'm convinced that should happen in civil cases as well. That we as a society ought to take some money from somewhere and use it to fund the same thing as a public defender's office for civil litigants, so that nobody goes to court representing themselves. I'm fond of saying that, if you wake up in the hospital, that's a sign from God you need a doctor. And the same thing is true in you find yourself in the courthouse. That's a sign that you need a lawyer. We've got, our system has become too complex for even the smartest lay people to figure it out. I think if this guy had a lawyer, whether he would have won the case or not, who's to say? The case would have gone differently. He probably would not have felt, I have no option other than to kill this guy.
So in his case, was his decision to not have an attorney, was it out of financial distress, or was it because he just maybe was a little bit out of his head and thought that he was capable of representing himself?
I don't think it was a case of financial distress.
Got it.
But obviously, to plan to kill somebody and then to carry it out, it really does take a mindset that I just don't have.
Yeah. Well, I remember when you did finally come over to the house, a bit later, and knocked on the door, and you told me a little bit about the story. I don't think that there was a lot of facts going on at that, but it was just kind of, hey, this is what happened. This is what you mentioned, the bailiff piece. But I remember you telling me, because I have a habit of going for late night walks and runs, and you told me, hey man, like if you find yourself taking a late night walk or run, you may A, want to rethink it, or B, at least like stop by the police officer out front and let him know.
20 minutes from now, you're gonna come running down the street. Y'all just understand it's just me coming back home.
That's right. Has that been one of the few times in your career as a judge where you felt like your personal safety was threatened?
I've had a couple of those over the years. Fortunately, we've had some really magnificent law enforcement folks, from the constable's office through up to and including the Texas Rangers, and they believe strongly in looking out for us, and have done very, very well. Sadly, our society is such where too often violence is an answer, and we see violence advocated against institutions, and that gets in the wrong people's heads from time to time, and they think, okay, I'm not going to let the legal process work out. I'm not going to follow the law. I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do, and the decisions, sometimes they're just cataclysmic. Yeah.
I'll stay on one more legal topic and then get into the more fun personal topic for a couple minutes. So another time I come outside on the deck. It's 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. We're probably a month or two in, and you sometimes, one of the things I appreciate about you, would sit out on your patio, which is just below the deck that I walk out onto, and you smoke a cigar.
Yes, sir.
And you maybe have a tequila. And when I'm really lucky, and it wasn't the very beginning of the pandemic, oftentimes you would just invite me over to partake with you. But that day, normally you're a pretty stoic guy. I would describe you as pretty stoic in your demeanor, but always happy and always positive. But that day, when I said, hey, how's it going? You weren't your normal self. You were a little bit more melancholy. And it's funny, I actually journaled about that. And as I was prepping for this, I remembered journaling during that time. And I used that word to describe you that day. Like, I've never seen Eric melancholy. And I asked you what was going on, and you had told me that was the day, I think it was the second day in history that you had ever sent someone to prison.
Yes. Yeah.
And you follow that up with, hey, you may want to hunker down and stay inside because we may have some visitors out front in protest. And I was like, I felt like you were talking in code a little bit. And then 10 minutes later, I pull up like Fox News and CNN, and there Eric is headlining, having sentenced someone to a few days, behind bars for violating an executive order issued by the state governor to shut their business down at COVID, and they refused to do so, and also made a public spectacle about having refused to do so. And tell me about what you remember about that period of time, and am I describing your demeanor accurately?
You are. I first heard about COVID on the morning news one day, about this some strange disease, and these people on a ship outside of Seattle, I think it was, and we heard the term pandemic a handful of years ago, and with another disease that got handled pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so, okay, it's going to be one of those. And then all of a sudden, this exponential explosion, and then we start seeing some fatalities. And I remember getting a call from the office of the Supreme Court of Texas, inviting me to accept an assignment to quarantine people, and there was one judge in each of the 16 or 17, 15 judicial regions around the state. And in a public health crisis, public health officials can say, hey, this guy is a threat to the public health. He or she needs to be quarantined. And I got this book of material. And in the beginning of it, it was a discussion of how quickly COVID was spreading. And remember, at the time, we weren't sure exactly how it was transmitted. Did you have to shake somebody's hand? Did you have to kiss them? Did you have to breathe the same air they did? And we also had no idea as to how virulent it was. And so that was a real rude awakening. And then we have this individual that says, I'm going to keep my hair salon open, tore up the governor's order. Then the county and the city both wanted to shut her business. They filed an application for a restraining order, which happens all the time. And it just landed by random assignment in my court. And I said, okay, governor says you got to shut down. You must shut down. And she refused. And so we had a hearing. And I said, as I've said every time I've come close to sending somebody to jail, which I do very rarely, I said, if I wanted to send people to jail, I would be a criminal court judge. This is not what I want to do. And we had a hearing, and the state put on its evidence. Okay, here's the order. The order says you can't do this. Here's video of her doing exactly that. Here's video of her saying. And then she took the stand and said, yes, my people have to work. They got families to feed. I got to be responsible, and this is what we're going to do. And, at the end of the day, we expect orders to be followed. It's not like a party invitation.
Yeah.
The governor says these businesses must shut down. Health clubs, restaurants, and public gatherings in general. Public gathering places in general, I should say. And she just said, and I finally said, okay, I'm going to make these findings. I will hear you if there's anything you want to say. And her response was, do what you're going to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Which really made it pretty easy. Excuse me.
No, bless you. No worries.
Thank you. She really did make it easy. Just saying, do what you're going to do. I saw your order. I saw the governor's order. Yeah, I tore up the governor's order.
And 1 second, Eric. Sorry. Tried to switch microphone. Now we're back. Now we're back. No. Okay. You're good. You're good.
And she just said, I did these things. I think I needed to stay open, and I'm going to stay open. And I said, well, no, you're not. And I had the sheriff's deputies take her into custody and book her into the Sterrett Center. I still don't know why she was so adamant about that. People were dying. And if it's a surgeon and they say, okay, I've got to replace this kidney, or this child is going to die tomorrow, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I got that. I understand how that show must go on. This I couldn't figure out. And so off she went, and she stayed for, I think, 2 days. And the governor then changed amended his executive order to say that people who violated that order would be fined but not incarcerated.
I remember that because I felt like at the time, I mean, obviously hindsight 2020, and I personally, you see a lot of there was a lot of politicking happening throughout that entire process, back and forth. But as someone who, and you and I have talked a lot about this, I mean, I find myself typically more on the conservative side of politics.
Mm-hmm.
You're clearly a Democrat. I'm more of a conservative Republican, or sorry, moderate Republican. I think you're a moderate Democrat, it's safe to say. But, I was even very disheartened at the time and felt a little bit let down by the governor, because your job in the judicial system is to carry forth, right?
Exactly
the
right.
law as, So
they write the laws.
Yeah, exactly.
We take facts, we take law, and we put them together.
So there was a lot of, again, media got involved, right? And at first you're kind of some organizations are kind of casting you as a hero, others are casting you as a villain. At the end of the day, right? Like, governor changes position.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're kind of just made to be the fall guy and the villain through the whole process. Like, how did that impact you at all?
No.
I didn't think it would, but I had to ask the question.
Well, at the end of the day, I was certain that I did the right thing.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a set of circumstances that was going to persuade me to the contrary. And when we're doing contempt issues, whether it's not paying child support or keeping a child or competing against a business improperly, one of the things that we measure in terms of meting out justice is if somebody has done something, do they deny it or do they admit it and express some contrition? I probably shouldn't have slashed your tires so that I could beat your car to pick up that taxi fare. I probably shouldn't padlock your doors, put super glue in your locks so that I can open up my business next to yours and get your customers. I'm sorry I did what I did. I really shouldn't have done it. And the two times in 20 years almost, the two times when I have had to enforce an order by way of contempt, it were both times when someone just said, I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I'm doing. And back when I was a lawyer and I represented people who occasionally found themselves in that position, my advice to my client was always, listen, tell me whether you did this or not. You did this? Okay. Let's explain to the judge why you did what you did. And hopefully we can frame your explanation in a way that sounds like, I really didn't realize that I was violating your order, Your Honor. Had I realized it, looking back on it now, I never should have done what I did. I'm never going to do it again, and I am as sorry can be. And I have, on a number of occasions, had clients eat that kind of crow and never went to jail.
Yeah. On a more personal human perspective, and even knowing, I guess I would ask you to answer this question knowing what you know now about the pandemic. No wrong answer, clearly, but just want to get your take. So when she makes an argument, though, that she's got employees who have families and they need, I don't even know what she said. If she said, they need to make a paycheck or they need to feed their family or whatever it was. How do you feel about that response relative to, the action that had happened?
The governor said health gyms couldn't open.
Yeah.
They had employees. The governor said movie theaters can't open. They had employees. Shopping malls were closed. Schools were closed. everything that could be open was closed, except for a handful of exceptions, like grocery stores.
Yep.
If she was operating a hospital, I'd have felt a little bit differently. I don't know that I'm reasonably sure that my response would have been the same. If you feel that your business is essential, if you feel you've got to stay open, call Governor Abbott and say, listen, Governor, the unintended consequence of what you're doing is putting my people out of work, and I can't afford to pay them. And have him change his order. But I mean, we think about, I think the term would be anarchy. If people decided, okay, there's a law that says you can't drive more than 70 miles an hour on the highway. I have a circumstance where I think I should drive 90 on the highway, and I'm going to go ahead and drive 90 on the highway. If I get pulled over, I better be able to tell an officer, my wife is about to deliver a baby and we're heading to the hospital.
Yeah.
But if I'm just saying, well, I got to make a living, and the way I make my living is by delivering pizza within 10 minutes of it coming out of the oven, and if I don't do this, then I'm not working, that's probably not an argument that's going to carry the day and keep me from getting a ticket. We're in a society that is so interconnected. If all of her employees, if one of her employees contracted the virus from one of their customers and spreads through that store, and then you've got, rather than 10 employees who aren't working, you got 10 employees who are sitting in a morgue somewhere. Yeah. Not in a much better position, it seems to me.
Yeah, you're right. It's a great response. My dad is going to love that minute 57 to 59. The part, Dad, about the driving, the speed limit being 70 and people having a reason to drive 90. I don't think my dad can't play your mom's pregnant card anymore, clearly. But I don't think that he would have to get creative in his response for his reasoning.
He and I are in the same position.
At least we're speaking truth here.
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, let's talk about a couple more fun things before I let you get on your way. How'd you meet your wife?
She describes it as the most nerdy meeting of all time. I'm very active in the Harvard Club. I'm a member of the director of the Harvard Club of Dallas. And one of the things I do is assist with programming. And we had a luncheon one day, and the district attorney, John Crusoe, has been a friend of mine since he was in law school. And we invited him to come and speak to the Harvard Club. And unbeknownst to me, I know his son Ethan very well. His son went to school with my wife's middle daughter.
Okay.
And my wife and Crusoe's families knew one another. And I sent an invitation to all of the Harvard alums saying, hey, the DA's coming. Sure be nice to have a nice crowd for him. And, as he got up to speak, he starts into his remarks and then just says, oh, hi, Veronica. And this strikingly beautiful woman walks in the back of the room. And I'm kind of like, wow, okay. And so he finishes his talk, and he and I are chatting, and she walks up, and she speaks to him, and I'm kind of like, hey, buddy, hook a brother up, give me an introduction. And he said, oh, do you know Judge Moyé? And she said, well, no, I don't think so. I've heard of him. And I introduced myself, and we chatted for a few minutes, and I invited her to come out and have actually I said, come join me one evening for a soda. And her response was, I don't drink soda. And I said, well, I'll find something else for you. And we went out and we had a couple of cocktails and had a real nice conversation and have talked every day since then.
So is it strange, though, that you being in the legal community as long as you had been in Dallas, your paths had never crossed?
Staggering to me. Now, she says, and this is probably something you're going to want to edit out. She says that she had been introduced to me at an event 2 or 3 years before. And, I guess, and I was just like, oh, hi, yeah, so nice to meet you, because I was obviously with somebody else.
Yeah.
And, but that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
God's timing.
Yes, indeed.
I can't edit that part out, though. I mean, come on, man. So what's life been like? Because you were in a long relationship before that.
Mm-hmm.
What's life been like for you being remarried? Because you were married before. You got a couple kids. You got some grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like? I know you're in a long relationship, but it's a different commitment, right? When you decide to be married. What's the dynamic been like? How has that made you feel supported in your job, supported in life?
It has been idyllic. It has been wonderful. As I said to you when I first greeted you coming in, I said, ain't nobody doing better than me.
You've said that. You say that every time I see you.
Well, because it's been true. It's been true.
I appreciate that about you. I know. I know you always mean it when you say it.
I do. I have a wife who loves and supports me. She is my brother was the smartest person I've ever met in my life. And Veronica is a close second. She chose MIT to go to college after being valedictorian of her high school class here in Dallas, because she thought that would be more challenging than going to Harvard or to Princeton. Now, I guess when you're young, you can really look for challenges. I've always been the kind of guy, I just assume not to be too challenged if I didn't have to be. But she chose MIT, and then she chose Harvard, and she's blazed a path as a brilliant lawyer for a number of years. We have fun together. We travel easily. We are both, although we are both very type A, moving, aggressive personalities. Actually, she's not as aggressive certainly as I am, but
very driven people.
Very driven,
mission focused,
yep. Goal oriented. But we both like every now and again to sit back, and the biggest challenge is, okay, do we have a bottle of wine downstairs by the pool, or do we go upstairs and look out over the ocean, and let's just not do anything for a while. And fortunately, we've as well, as great a calling as law is, as you reference, if you're lucky and you work hard and you do it well, financially you end up being okay. And we've been in a position where we can travel when we want, live where we want, do the things that we want to do. And so it's been great.
Yeah, and she's from Oak Cliff originally,
right? She is an OCG, Oak Cliff girl.
OCG.
Oak Cliff girl. Yes,
and
indeed.
I mean, anybody that's representing companies like Apple in cases against companies like Epic, and anybody that just go Google Apple versus Epic, and she represented Apple in that case. So you've got a lady from Oak Cliff.
Yes, indeed.
Goes to MIT, goes to Harvard, practices law here in Dallas, gets picked up by one of the most valuable companies, handpicked by the CEO, Tim Cook.
Yep.
Pretty impressive, my man. That's got to be tough to kind of walk into every night, like when you have any type of debate about something. Like that's got to be a little bit intimidating.
Every now and again, she will we'll be home and we'll be talking about something, and I will make a declaration, and she will look around the room incredulously and say, did we just transport into the courthouse? Are you a judge this late at night? And I just kind of, no, baby, let me dial it back a little bit. And she'll say, okay. I'll tell you a funny story about the Epic versus Apple case. That case was being tried in the middle of COVID.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was a 4-week trial in the Northern District of California in the Oakland Division, United States District Court. And as I would do when she was in trial and I had the chance, I would go and hang out for the weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, she finishes up Friday evening, go to a hotel, relax a little bit, go have dinner, take her mind off work Saturday, then I fly back on Sunday and let her get back into it. Well, she made the mistake of telling me that I should go not to the courthouse, but to go to the hotel where we were going to stay because the courthouse was closed. Could not get into the courthouse. They restricted the number of people going in. And so I'm kind of a contrarian. And so I land about 1 PM. I drop my bags at the hotel. I pull a tie out, put on the shirt, and I decide I'm going to the courthouse. And so I get to the courthouse. I go to the marshal's office, the door, the only door that's open, and they say, "What's your business here? The courthouse is closed." And I said, "Well, my wife is one of the lawyers in the Epic versus Apple case." And the guy says, "Oh, you must be Mr. Moyé." I said, "Well, no, actually, I'm Judge Moyé. I'm a judge, a state court judge in Texas." "Well, Judge, come on in." So we go into the courtroom very unobtrusively. I sit down in the back. They finish up for the day. The judge leaves the bench. And so she and her team are gathering all of their stuff. And a young lawyer comes back and I'm just sitting in the second row, and the first row is full with boxes and stuff. And so this young lawyer comes back, and I say, "Excuse me, young lady?" And she says, "Yes." I said, "That woman," and I pointed at Veronica. I said, "She's a lawyer for Apple?" And she said, "Yes, she is." I said, "I've been sitting here watching. She's brilliant. I'm listening to the arguments. I'm watching the judge. I've never seen anybody respond like that before." And she said, "Yeah, well, she's really a good lawyer." And I said, "And she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And now this woman kind of taking a little step back.
Yeah, a little uncomfortable.
Okay, yeah. The weird meter is, we passed the green, we passed the yellow, we're inching up toward the red. And I said, "I have got to meet this woman." And now she's just freaked out. And Veronica turns around and sees her turning bright red, and then sees me and just rushes over and says, "I'm not sure what my husband has said to you, but just ignore him. Don't pay him any mind." And the relief on this girl's face, like, "Oh my God, thank you. And then, of course, "How could you get in here?" And I just said, "How could I not when you told me I couldn't? If you really wanted me to be at the hotel, you should say, don't worry about it. Just don't stress yourself out. I'll be there when I get there."
Oh, man. Well, the only bone to pick that I've got with her is the fact that she took you away from Kessler Park as my neighbor, and you guys moved up to her place.
Yeah. Women make you do crazy things if you're lucky.
If you're lucky. Touche. All right, I got two more things. Tell me about the role that faith has played in your life.
I grew up in the church. My mother, both of my grandmothers were faithful, religious, every Sunday churchgoers. Like many young people, I got off to college. I'm on my own. I stopped going to church for a long time. Never stopped believing, of course. I shouldn't say of course. Never stopped believing. And started going back to church in the early 80s. Pastor Zan Holmes, who I'd mentioned earlier. I think that God has a plan for all of us. And when we are successful, we are fulfilling his plan for us. I don't have all the answers. I cannot say what God's plan is for children who are dying in Gaza. I can't say what God's plan is for people who are dying anywhere in the world, tragically. But I think that God has a plan for me. I know God has a plan for me. Part of it, I think, is doing what I do for a living. Part of it, I think, is turning my stepsons from 11-year-old knucklehead boys into 30-something-year-old grown men and what I used to call them citizens, people who are doing things positive with their lives, now each of them with families of their own. Of that, I'm as certain of that as I am that if I dropped my pen right now, it would fall to the carpet. Can't explain it. Cannot intellectually tell you why that is. Can't tell you where he is. But, faith is just that, belief in things unseen.
Yeah.
And I've got friends who are non-believers. One of my dearest friends, incredibly good guy, just doesn't. And we talk about religion from time to time. You might feel a little better about things if you knew that there was somebody in control, and also if you knew that at the end of this part of your journey, there's something better on the other side.
Yeah.
I lost my brother in December. He succumbed to cancer. And my grief was debilitating, but in really, really short bursts. So I'd be sitting somewhere doing something, and I'd think about my brother, and I'd just be paralyzed for 5 minutes, and sometimes crying out in anguish, sometimes just weeping silently. And then it would pass. And those episodes became fewer and fewer. I know he's sitting with my mother and my father and the ancestors. I know he's in a better place. I can't imagine how I would have gotten through my valleys in life without belief that, okay, this is just something that you got to go through to get to a better place.
Yeah. Amen to that, man. Said very eloquently.
Wow.
I have the same. And I've struggled throughout the years. I have a bad habit of imposter syndrome, right? Like not thinking that, I'm good enough in a lot of areas in my life. And that's something that I've struggled with for a really long time. I mean, going back to being even a teenager, I remember. And I struggle with that in my spiritual life, right? And it's funny. I've got one of my close friends, and he's been a kind of a life coach for me. He's a pastor in Arizona. His name is Rory Clark, and he's had me read this book called "Sit, Stand, Walk." It's by a guy named Watchman Nee, and it's kind of a commentary on the book of Ephesians.
Okay.
But the premise is in order to be, received by and to have favor from God, it just takes a simple belief. And
right.
It's just sitting in that. Like step one is before you can stand and walk, you really have to just realize that, there's nothing that you can do to earn that. It's already been done for you.
Right. It's been paid for.
And for that, it's easy to say that. It's easy for me to say that because I do believe that. But man, to live my life and make decisions from a place of demonstrating that belief all the time is very, very difficult for me.
Well, if you believe that you are a child of God, God knows you, how could you be an imposter?
Yeah. No,
let me not be rhetorical, which I am talking. You cannot be an imposter in the eyes of God.
Yeah.
God knows what's in your heart, and He knows who you are, and so you are in this place, I think, because that's where God wants you to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, I completely agree. And I think, again, intellectually and even factually, like I believe that it's more just the stories you tell yourself every day, right? I'm not good enough for X, Y, and Z. I don't deserve X, Y, and Z. And those things tend to impact decision processes quite negatively a lot of times. So, but I know, going back to you, I know that one of the things that I could always count on every Sunday without fail, if I had a conversation with you, was you talking about having been to church earlier in the day, and oftentimes that was followed by the revving of your Harley coming through the back alley. You going for one of your the many lives and faces of Eric. I mean, if you guys could see Eric right now. And by the way, this is the first podcast I'm doing face to face. Every other one I've done virtual.
Huh. I just want to see you.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. But if you guys, if my listeners could see you right now, I mean, the guy is dressed to the nines. He's got his Navy sport coat. He's got dark slacks on. He's got his white shirt. He's got his pocket square. But Eric also has his leathers.
Yeah.
Because you still got the Harley?
No.
Oh man, your wife made you get rid of it.
Amy and Veronica Amy, my daughter, and Veronica conspired to make me sell it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You got your leathers still?
Some of them, yeah. Actually, the guys I ride with, I got framed my cut.
Okay.
Which is for your friends who don't know, vest with. I used to ride with a handful of guys.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've got that at the other house, but I still have my leather jackets because although they, if you're gonna fall down, you want some leather on to scrape.
That's
Absolutely.
what you always told me.
But they also look so cool. They look so cool.
I just remember the first time I saw you in that, I was like, it took me a minute. I was like, wait a minute. This is not the same Eric
Who is this guy?
Who is this guy? Exactly. Oh man. Well, look, thank you so much for spending time with me today, man.
It's been my pleasure, James. So good. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you
It's
too.
great to talk through these things. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Oh man, thank you. I mean, I think it's one of the things I just always appreciate about you, because people get busy, and friendships tend to take back seats to just the everyday hustle and bustle of life. But I always appreciate the friends that I have that on meaningful days, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, just every now and again getting a random text, hey, thinking about you, you've been on my mind, Merry Christmas, Happy Thanksgiving. You do those things all the time, and every time you do, man, brings me back to how appreciative I am of you and people like you who are in my life. And
well, like I said earlier before we went on, maybe we were on. Water seeks its own level, and it's interesting. I know a bunch of people who don't have very many friends, and I know people who have a lot of friends. And the people who have a lot of friends are good friends. They're the people who extend themselves to one another. And that comes back to you. And the people who don't, who are bitter, sometimes angry, often alone, because they never extend, or when someone extends to them, they slap the hand away. So you can't get good friends without being a good friend.
No.
And I believe that to my core.
I appreciate that. Same here, man. Same here. Well, thanks a lot for the time today.
A pleasure. God bless you.
Amen.